You can know 10,000 English words and still freeze the second someone asks you a question.
And the reason has almost nothing to do with grammar. Stick around because we're about to break the one habit that's keeping you stuck.
Okay, so I want to start with a story, Emma, and I think you're going to relate to this one hard.
Oh no, is this the embarrassing one?
It's the embarrassing one.
Okay, go for it.
So there's this guy, Benny Lewis. He's Irish. He studied electronic engineering in college, and by the time he graduated, he had taken years of Spanish and German classes. Years, Emma.
Okay, so he should have been pretty solid, right?
You think so, but he moved to Spain at 21, completely confident, and within about 6 months, he gave up entirely. He said he just didn't have the gene for languages. He couldn't hold a basic conversation even after all those years of classroom study.
That's wild, because that's exactly the fear most of our listeners have. Like, I've been studying for years and I still can't talk.
Right, exactly. But here's the twist. A few years later, he decides to try one more time, except this time he changes his whole approach. He refuses to speak a single word of English. From the very first day in a new country, he forces himself into conversations even when he barely knows 10 words.
Even when he's terrible at it.
Especially when he's terrible at it. And within a few months, he's having real conversations. Not perfect ones, but real ones. And he ends up doing this over and over, learning language after language. And he builds this whole philosophy around it. The classroom version of him failed. The version of him who just started talking badly on day one succeeded.
Okay, so this connects to something I've noticed with my own Spanish, honestly. I took Spanish for, 4 years in school?
I remember you complaining about verb conjugation charts.
So many charts. And I could conjugate hablar in like 6 tenses on paper. But the first time I tried to order food in Mexico City, I just stood there, tongue-tied, completely blank.
Tongue-tied, that's a good one for our listeners. It means you want to talk, but the words just won't come out, like your tongue is literally stuck.
Exactly that feeling. And it wasn't until I started actually talking to my tutor every week, making mistakes constantly, that something clicked. Not from more charts, from talking.
And that's basically the whole story with French for me, too. I did Duolingo for like a year, felt great about my streak, and then I went to Paris and ordered a coffee, and the barista responded so fast, I just nodded and said oui to something I didn't understand.
What did you agree to?
I genuinely don't know. It might have been extra shots. It might have been a pastry. I just smiled and panicked.
That's the dream, though, right? Accidentally ordering a mystery pastry?
Best mistake I ever made, honestly. But that moment is exactly what we're talking about today. So many of our listeners study constantly, vocabulary lists, grammar books, apps, and they still hit that wall the moment a real human is standing in front of them expecting a real answer.
So today's episode is about why that happens, and more importantly, what actually fixes it. Real conversation hacks, not just more study tips.
So let's get into the why, because there's actual research behind this, and it's kind of fascinating. There's a linguist named Meryl Swain, and back in the 80s, she studied something interesting in Canada.
What was she looking at?
So Canada has these immersion programs where English-speaking kids get taught entirely in French, all their school subjects, for years. And the assumption was, if you just listen to a language constantly, you'll naturally become fluent in producing it too.
That makes sense on the surface.
Right, but here's the surprising part. These kids could understand French incredibly well after years of immersion, like near-native listening comprehension. But when they actually had to speak or write in French, their grammar was full of errors, way more than you'd expect.
So all that listening wasn't enough on its own.
Exactly. And Swain's conclusion was that just receiving the language, just listening and reading, isn't enough to make you fluent. You actually need to produce it. You need to push yourself to speak and write because that's what forces your brain to notice the gaps. She called it the output hypothesis.
Output, meaning actually producing language, not just absorbing it.
Exactly. When you're just listening, you can kind of float along and get the gist without fully processing every grammar detail. But the moment you actually have to open your mouth and form a sentence yourself, your brain hits a wall. It realizes, wait, I don't actually know how to say this part. And that moment of realizing the gap is what triggers real learning.
That's such a good way to put it. It's like the difference between reading a recipe and actually cooking the meal. Reading it, you nod along, sure, that makes sense. But the second you're standing at the stove, you realize you don't actually know how long to cook the rice.
Right. And you only find that out by trying to cook it yourself.
Okay, so this connects to another concept, too, this idea of desirable difficulty. There's a psychologist, Robert Bjork, who studies memory, and his research basically shows that when something feels a little hard, when you have to struggle a bit to retrieve a word or a memory, you actually remember it better afterward than if it had just been handed to you easily.
So the struggle itself is doing something useful.
Exactly. If I show you a flashcard with the word right there, that's easy, but it doesn't stick as well. But if I ask you a question and you have to dig around in your memory, struggling a little to find the word yourself, that struggle actually strengthens the memory. So when you're in a real conversation and you're scrambling to find a word, that scrambling, as uncomfortable as it feels, is literally building stronger memory connections than passive review ever could.
Okay, that genuinely makes me feel better about every awkward conversation I've ever had in French.
Right? The awkwardness is doing work.
There's also this other factor, the emotional side of it, which I think people underestimate. Stephen Krashen, who's a big name in language acquisition research, talks about something called the affective filter.
That sounds like a coffee filter for emotions.
Kind of, actually. Basically, the idea is that when you're anxious, embarrassed, or stressed, your brain puts up a filter that blocks language from getting through, even language you actually know. You've studied the word, you know it's in there somewhere, but the anxiety is basically jamming the signal.
Oh, that explains so much. Like when someone asks you a simple question and your mind just goes completely blank, even though you knew the answer 5 minutes ago.
Exactly that. It's not that you forgot the word, it's that the fear of making a mistake is literally blocking access to it in that moment.
So lowering that fear, getting more comfortable with making mistakes, isn't just a nice mindset thing. It's actually removing a real barrier to your brain accessing the words you already know.
Which brings us to the part everyone's been waiting for. How do you actually do this? What are the real hacks?
Okay, hack number 1, and I think this is the most important one. Stop translating in your head.
Say more.
So a lot of learners, when someone asks them a question in English, their brain first translates the question into their native language, thinks of the answer in their native language, then translates that answer back into English. It's this whole 3-step process happening in your head before you say a single word.
And that takes time, which creates those long, awkward pauses.
Exactly. And it also adds a ton of pressure because you're doing triple the mental work. The hack is to practice thinking directly in English, even in small moments throughout your day. Like when you're making coffee in the morning, just narrate it to yourself in English. I'm pouring the water. The coffee smells really strong today. You're not translating anything. You're just thinking in English directly.
That's basically self-talk, right?
Exactly. Self-talk. And it sounds a little silly, talking to yourself out loud, but it builds the habit of generating English sentences without that translation step slowing you down.
I actually do a version of this with French, and it's called shadowing, which is hack number 2, honestly.
Oh, tell people about shadowing because I think it's underrated.
So shadowing is where you listen to a native speaker, a podcast, a YouTube video, whatever, and you repeat what they're saying almost simultaneously, like a shadow following right behind them. You're not translating. You're not even necessarily thinking about meaning in that moment. You're just copying the sounds, the rhythm, the intonation as closely as you can.
And why does that help with conversation specifically?
Because conversation isn't just about knowing words, it's about your mouth physically knowing how to produce the sounds quickly. Shadowing builds muscle memory, literally training the muscles in your mouth and tongue to move the way a native speakers do. So when you're in a real conversation, the sounds come out more naturally and quickly because your mouth has already practiced making them hundreds of times.
It's like rehearsing a sentence before you actually need it.
Exactly. And you can do it anywhere. I do it in the car, repeating after French podcasts, probably looking insane to other drivers.
Honestly, same with my Spanish ones. My neighbors definitely think I'm having an argument with myself sometimes.
Hack number 3 then, and Emma, I feel like this one's yours.
Yeah, this one's circumlocution, which sounds like a fancy word, but it's actually really simple. It just means talking around a word you don't know instead of stopping completely.
Give us an example.
So say you're in a conversation and you forget the word umbrella. Instead of freezing and going silent, you say something like, the thing you use when it rains to keep your head dry. It's like a small roof you carry. You're describing it instead of stopping.
So you keep the conversation moving even with gaps in your vocabulary.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Native speakers do this constantly, too. We forget words all the time in our own language. You'll hear someone say, oh, what's that word? The thing where... That's completely normal human communication. It's not a sign that your English is bad. It's a sign that you're communicating like an actual fluent speaker does.
That's such a good reframe because I think a lot of learners feel like forgetting a word means they've failed somehow.
Right. But fluency was never about knowing every word. It's about keeping the conversation flowing even when you don't.
Okay, hack number 4, and this one's a bit uncomfortable for people, but it works. Record yourself talking and listen back.
Oh, everyone hates this one.
Everyone hates it, including me. The first time I heard my own French recording, I wanted to throw my phone into a lake.
Why does it work, though, despite the discomfort?
Because when you're speaking in the moment, you're so focused on just getting the words out that you don't notice your own patterns, your filler words, the grammar mistakes you keep repeating. But when you listen back later with a bit of distance, you suddenly hear it clearly. Oh, I say constantly, or I keep using the wrong verb tense in that one situation.
Filler words. That's a good one for listeners, too, by the way. Those are words like like, the little sounds we use to fill silence while we're thinking. Every language has them, by the way. It's not just an English learner thing.
Totally normal. But recording yourself lets you spot your specific patterns so you can actually work on them instead of guessing.
Hack number 5, and this is the one I think people avoid the most because it's scary. Find a real conversation partner, not just an app.
Why does a real person matter so much compared to an app?
Because apps are predictable. They're not going to surprise you, interrupt you, speak quickly, or expect you to respond in real time with real stakes. A real conversation partner, whether that's a language exchange app, a tutor, or even just a patient friend, forces you to handle the unpredictability of actual human conversation, which is ultimately what you're training for.
It's the difference between practicing free throws alone in your driveway versus playing in an actual basketball game.
That's a perfect comparison, honestly. The driveway practice matters, but at some point you have to get into the game with other people moving around unpredictably.
And the last hack, number 6, which kind of ties everything together, give yourself permission to be imperfect. Aim for good enough instead of perfect.
This connects right back to what we talked about earlier with that affective filter.
Exactly. If your standard for opening your mouth is only speak if the sentence will be grammatically perfect, you'll barely speak at all, because that standard is basically impossible in real-time conversation, even for native speakers, honestly.
We mess up our own language constantly. I mix up words in English all of the time.
Same. So the goal isn't perfection, it's communication. Did the other person understand what you meant? If yes, that's a win, mistakes included.
I love the phrase some learners use for this, winging it. Just winging it through the conversation, doing your best with what you've got in the moment instead of waiting until you feel ready.
Because honestly, you're never going to feel fully ready. The readiness comes from the doing, not before it.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap before we wrap up, because we covered a lot of useful vocabulary today, along with the hacks themselves.
Let's do it. So first, we had tongue-tied, which describes that moment when you want to speak, but the words just won't come out.
Then we had the output hypothesis, which is the idea that actually producing language, speaking and writing, teaches you more than just listening and reading alone.
Desirable difficulty, which is when a little struggle while trying to remember something actually helps it stick better in your memory.
The affective filter, that emotional block that anxiety creates, making it harder to access words you actually already know.
Self-talk, talking to yourself directly in English to build the habit of thinking in the language instead of translating.
Shadowing, repeating after a native speaker almost simultaneously to train your mouth and build natural rhythm.
Circumlocution, talking around a word you don't know instead of going silent.
Filler words, those little sounds like and that everyone uses in every language while thinking.
And winging it, just doing your best in the moment instead of waiting to feel perfectly ready.
That's a lot of great vocabulary and, honestly, a lot of great tools, too.
So if you take one thing from today's episode, let it be this. Stop waiting until you feel ready to speak. Benny Lewis didn't wait. He just started talking badly on day 1, and that's what actually worked.
The struggle, the mistakes, the awkward pauses, that's not failure. That's literally the process working exactly the way it's supposed to.
So go order that coffee, even if you end up with a mystery pastry like I did.
Especially if you end up with a mystery pastry.
That's it for today's episode. Keep listening, keep talking, and we'll catch you in the next one.
See you next time.